Oh, no, I'm a half a barley.
That's a half.
That's a half, okay. We can just, yes. I'm gonna just take my.
I put a coaster under her glass, I didn't know it was,
That's great.
yeah. It's not my table, but this is where
Thank you.
Incidentally, if you guys are interested, this is where Sheila and I have our mediation office, and this is where this is the room I conduct my private judging trials in. Works out really well.
Okay, we have Jane Gaunt and Sandy Islands. They are going to present on substance abuse disorders and how they impact the families you work with.
Right?
Because it's an huge ongoing issue.
Huge.
And I have to, this has nothing to do with the rest of you, but I have to say to the two of you, thank you so much for the responsiveness as we were trying to do this. I know it was chaotic. No, you do not know how much they lived through to get this. So thank you very much.
That's fine.
Yeah.
It's really glad to be here.
And if you have any questions, just feel free to jump in.
Yeah. This is such a big topic, and I know you have specific interests in terms of how you're dealing with these things, but I'll just introduce myself.
Did you hit the button?
I did.
Oh, good.
Yeah. My name is Jane Gaunt. I am a licensed marriage family therapist, and I have been involved with addiction for my entire life. I come from an addicted family. I worked for over 30 years in substance use treatment. I'm in about 10 years in a private practice now. I also worked for Child Protective Services for 7 years as a social worker, and I was a court officer for San Bernardino County Juvenile Court for a while. And I also am in recovery myself. So I have certain biases that I wanted to just start off with, and I'll let Sandy introduce herself first. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm Sandy Islands, and I legally changed my name to that in the 80s. People always say, is that your real name? At that point, I didn't want to, probably because a lot of the topic we're talking about, I didn't want to go back to my father's name or any of ex-husband's names. So I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor, also a licensed alcohol and drug counselor in California. And like Jane, I've worked in substance abuse counseling. I'm in private practice right now. And I worked for drug court and 4 different treatment programs here, and in all of them, doing family programs as well. And I'm also in recovery. I have 32 years clean and sober, and I've also attended, so I actively attend NA meetings and also Al-Anon meetings, because a lot of family members are also either active addicts or recovering addicts.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm also sober for 51 years.
Woo!
So when we talked about the impact on families, it's really multi-generational. We talked about the impact on the entire lifespan of kids earlier. You were talking about that. Even though we only see a small portion of it, the impact of the trauma that occurs in addicted families, especially in severe cases, it's multi-generational. I come from a family where there's a whole stream of addiction preceding me, and so there's an impact all the way down through the generations.
And then there's a biological predisposition as well. So if one of your parents was an addict or alcoholic, you have 50% chance. If both of them, you have a pretty much 100% biological predisposition. That doesn't mean you have to actually become an addict or alcoholic, but you have that. Like we told our son that. His father also was an addict, and that he had 100% predisposition, and just to be aware of that in his choices he was making.
Yeah, so it's a complicated interaction between biology, culture, family dynamic, and the amount of impact that substance use is having. I mean, substance use disorders, I guess I can change this. Substance use disorders are on a spectrum from severe to mild, and it depends on how much the distinguishing features are how much the alcohol or substance use disorder is impacting functioning, basically. How is it impacting health, how impacting work, impacting relationships, impacting, whatever. So I wanted, I guess I'm jumping ahead of myself, but what I want to talk about it is as a form of mental illness. That is really my bias. That's the way I see addiction, substance use disorders. They're a form of chronic illness, and they're also, all family members in the system are experiencing trauma.
And they're also listed in the DSM-5, but the difference, I think sometimes there's substance abusers and then there's substance dependent. So, and typically there's a thinking disorder that goes along with substance dependent, which is what makes it a mental illness.
Yeah.
A little bit more, because I think that's a really important distinction for people to understand the difference between all of them.
Yeah, so like,
Dependence and abuse and.
there are people that partied a lot in college and then all of a sudden they just made the decision, oh, I'm done with this, I'm going to stop. Typically, addicts and alcoholics, might have the desire to stop, but they can't stop. They break promises, all the promises that they make, only at night, only on weekends, only this substance, not that, only alcohol, not drugs, whatever. And then even if they stop using or drinking, there's gonna be a thinking disorder that goes along with it. Mental, thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and behaviors, which then will prompt them to pick up the drink or drug again. And then like Jane was talking about, if they have a co-occurring disorder, like another like anxiety disorder, depression, bipolar, then typically you can only really clearly diagnose what's happening if they get clean and sober first. Now you can really see what are the mental health issues and then treat those. And if they choose to be, let's say they're on a medication for their bipolar and they stay clean and sober, you might not know they have either of those disorders. They're just functioning.
And it's also not just a choice. The addiction itself, when you get to dependence, really is located sort of in lower parts of the brain that bypass critical thinking. So when a person is hit with a craving, or they stop for a while and then they talk themselves back into using or drinking again, it's coming not from their rational brain. It's coming from a deeper part of the brain that's seeking survival, emotional survival. Somehow addiction gets tied up with, I have to have this to survive, to be social, to be this, to be that. And so it's tied up with survival, and it's also, there's also a huge pleasure principle involved too. When you're talking about stopping use and when you're dependent, you're talking about not only something that's helping me survive, but it's also a huge source of pleasure, relief, and well-being in a way. So it's when we say it's so, just stop, it's just really not that simple. There are so many factors that go into contributing to the ongoing addiction and keep it propelling forward. It's not just because I'm a bad person or rotten or a narcissist or any of that. It's because I have this is my bias anyway, I have a form of mental illness that really bypasses my ability to think critically about whether I take a drink, pill, or fix or not.
I have a client right now who's got 5 years sober, sort of dances around the 12-step program, hasn't gotten a sponsor, doesn't work the steps, things like that. And every time I see her, she's like, I really miss drinking. I had my most fun drinking. I was, I'm so boring now, life, which is a lot of a lot of people that really immerse themselves in their recovery. Treatment programs are getting sober, but recovery is figuring out how to live sober. They don't really, the cravings decrease and the thinking, that kind of thinking decreases as well. And they can find joy and happiness being sober, so.
The other bias I have, I think we both share, is that recovery is possible. Recovery is possible, and it's not as uncommon as sometimes we can think, because the behavior of addicts can be so just mind-blowingly reprehensible when it's going on, and it appears like it's a choice they're making, and you just want to, even, I have felt that way, talking to clients, like, oh my God, how can you not see this? But the thing is, they don't, and their critical thinking is impaired around this. So it's, they're not essentially bad people. They just have a very bad mental illness. So it goes from mild to severe, as we said, and influenced by so many factors. It has to do, how old are they when this started? What is their family culture like? How important is drinking to the dynamic in the family? Sometimes the only way families can relate to each other is because they're sharing drug use or alcohol use. To me, alcohol, drugs are the same thing.
And Jane and I saw clients at Betty Ford who had been like maybe teachers or, working their whole lives. And then when they retired, and they had that only after 5, I'm going to have my couple drinks. And then all of a sudden it became, now I'm retired. So, okay, noon, I can start at noon. And next thing you know, they're coming into treatment at 60, in their 60s, realizing, oh, wow, I am an alcoholic or I am an addict. And
yeah. And then there's the other end of the spectrum now. We see kids very often. In my day, it's so often. When I got sober, I had most of my addiction during my adolescence and early 20s. It was unusual, to see a kid that young, 14, 15, with a substance use disorder. I don't think it's so unusual anymore.
Yeah, question?
You use the word alcoholic. I have read if you have to have a drink every single day, even if it's one, you're probably an alcoholic. I don't drink, so I don't know.
I don't.
I think each person, I can't say you're an alcoholic. It's a decision that you make, and there's questions you can ask yourself. Does it impact any aspect of your life? Does your personality change when you do it? Do you say, I'm just going to have, like someone said to me one time, well, a non-alcoholic has a drink, and then they might start their second one, and they go, oh, I'm feeling this, I better stop. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I never thought that. I'm feeling this, give me more, kind of thing. So then you just start, and it's a disease of denial, which is an acronym for don't even notice I am lying. So if I don't notice I'm lying to myself, I can't get honest with anybody else. And so that's, and some people, they'll come into treatment. I'm not an alcoholic, my parent, my mom, my husband made me come, but then they wake up, the layers of denial peel off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot what I was going to say about it.
The other thing I was going to say is I've had alcoholics or addicts who they stay dry all week, and then they start drinking or using it right after work Friday night at 5, go all day Friday all day, Saturday all day, Sunday, then they start drying out on Monday, and they realize, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict, because I couldn't stop. As soon as I pick up, couldn't stop.
And it's really not how much. The diagnostic criteria is more about how it's impacting you. Is it impacting a health issue? If one drink is impacting a health issue, maybe it's something I have to look at if I'm not able to stop, like that. So that would be, if one criteria would be very mild addiction. But it's, they even, the DSM threw out the word addiction and alcoholism. They call it substance use disorders now, and it's hard for me to switch my vocabulary a little bit, but because of the level of stigma that goes along with addiction. And that's a thing that it impacts our ability to see it as professionals. It impacts the person's ability, the family's ability. The stigma is so high that even the DSM, tried to shift that language. I don't think it shifts anybody's attitudes really, but it does shift something. Anyway, shall we go to the next? Okay.
So this is just something I found in some of my stuff I had, and it kind of separates out what you can expect from addictive behavior, when you're more integrated and more codependent behavior. Because there's always, if there's gonna be an addict or alcoholic, there's always gonna be a codependent or enabler. So even just the first one, we don't have to read them all, because you guys, I guess you guys will get a copy of this, but, you know, addicts are only concerned for themselves, and then codependents are only concerned for the addict, and seeing if they can fix, help, and change them. And then, obviously, if you're not in either of those situations, you have concern for yourself and your partner, and it's balanced and kind of goes on like that, so.
Any other questions at this point?
So if we're looking at from perspective of custody issues or like where kids, you know, how this affects, if someone is newly says, okay, I have a problem, their behaviors, even if they sober up, so to speak, their behaviors still may be problematic.
Yes.
Right, and that's why, I don't know, Jane and I always, part of our bias is that we do recommend the 12-step program, because then you have, you know, you're working on yourself outside of therapy and treatment and things like that, and so.
And the person that gets sober, not only is the whole family traumatized, the addict is also traumatized. I mean, the living an addicted lifestyle is extremely traumatic. You know, from being homeless to just being constantly trying to cover something up, and terrible things happen when, like, you're in a blackout, you don't even remember what happened, you hear about it later, all kinds of assault, fights, violence. I mean, just the gamut of, you know, every kind of awful thing you can imagine happens to addicts often when they're in their addiction. So it's not only that the family that's traumatized, it's also the addict who's recovering from a lot of trauma, usually as well.
And I think one of the difference, ideally, if they are sober or clean, or, you know, is that, like, when they're actively using, they're unaware that they're unaware, in denial that they're in denial, and don't know that they don't know. So then when they get sober, they're still unaware, but they're maybe aware that they're unaware. That's what you could say. So they'll have behaviors, but they acknowledge the behaviors. They're able to look at themselves. And they're in denial, but not in denial that they are. And then they're, you know, they might still not know, but they know they don't know. And they're open, you know, to learning.
And often when the addict, you know, wakes up and gets sober, the family doesn't. I mean, the family is now really mad.
And
they're
they
hurt.
They don't know what their
mad.
role is anymore. When they've been, you know, and all of a sudden the addict's responsible and accountable and reliable, and so that job of fixing, helping, changing, you know, being the victim in the martyr dance, you know, sometimes the codependent is upset.
Well,
And-
also they're hurt. They're
Yeah.
so hurt. They've tried and tried and tried, and this person just keeps acting this way, and they bring chaos completely to the entire family, and they're unreliable, and they screw up right at the worst time. So coming to terms with that, the codependents or the family members often have so much resentment, so much hurt, so much reactivity around the addict and their behavior. They have a lot of trouble adjusting back to any kind of normal family functioning. So that, you know, that's the reason that I think both of us share the bias that, and you mentioned it earlier, that everybody needs to be involved in the recovery process if we can hope for a best outcome.
Like there's Alateen for teenage kids, there's Al-Anon for friends and families of alcoholics, and now there's Nar-Anon, which is the sister program of Narcotics Anonymous. There's CODA, Codependence Anonymous. I mean, the only requirement for membership in CODA is a desire for healthy and functional relationships with yourself and others. And I go, who doesn't fit that category? I mean, so, yeah.
So the problems that we see for families of addicts are so many. We talked about attachment disorders earlier. When you have a parent or a family member, and sometimes both parents and siblings, I mean, it can be everybody too. But kids have trouble with attaching to, disconnected parents. Parents that are, totally unable to be responsive emotionally, are overreacting 1 minute, permissive the next, yelling and screaming, beating you up, not even remembering they did that the next day. There can be all kinds of things that really interrupt attachment. I'm going to talk a little bit about mothers because they're kind of, they have a lot of, there's so many issues attached to alcoholic mothers, but the attachment disruptions can happen with, either parent and just in the whole system, because when there's an active addiction going on, usually the non-addicted parent, if there is one, is overwhelmed, trying to clean up and salvage whatever's left of the family, and aren't really present either a lot of the time for that reason.
They're more focused on the alcoholic than their kids. So the kids feel abandoned kind of by both parents.
Or it can be the addicted sibling, where that kid is just draining all the family's energy because of their, chaotic, dangerous behavior, and involving usually younger siblings too. So the neglect, in really worst case scenarios, are just profound neglect, poor boundaries, all kinds of abuse. This can create all kinds of long-term relationship difficulties, and as others were mentioning, the chances of people from addicted families becoming addicted are very high, and PTSD and other forms of mental illness too. Any questions? Okay, so we talked a little bit about the sources of trauma from living in addiction. Domestic violence and all other forms of abuse are just highly increased in addicted families. Suicide attempts by family members, completed attempts, finding your parent suicided, pretty traumatic for people or your spouse. Family, depending on what kind of drugs you're using and how long, you can have psychosis, all kinds of disruption in the family system, abandonment by parents, homelessness, homicides. We were talking about families where homicide, but they're also parents murdering each other as well. People in rehabs, in and out of rehabs, coming out of rehab and then not being around because they're in other rehab. They're in AA or NA, or they're still not around. Hospitalizations because of every kind of problem, mental illness, physical illness, accidents, and then people with incarcerated parents. I mean, it's just a trauma show here. The impact on parenting. Anything that you want to say more about that, Sandy, or about they go from a swing from often neglectful to permissive, aggressive, overly punitive, to no boundaries at all, distress, chaos.
The fighting that's happening, and then the kid feels like they need to try to fix the parents' situation. And, oftentimes, as we see, because a lot of parenting is very unconscious unless we make it conscious. And so they might say, oh my God, I'll never be with anybody like my mother or my father, and then that's exactly who they'll pick. They'll be the mother and pick the father, or be the father and pick the mother, and so.
Addicted mothers, they have a lot of, stigma attached too. I mean, I think mothers that come into recovery are so overwhelmed with their own guilt and shame issues around parenting that sometimes that's very hard to get through. I have a friend who's she's in one of these multi-generational families where, from the great-grandparents to the current generation, lots of addiction all the way through. And this mother, their grandmother had a daughter who was a young addict, and that she overdosed at 20. The grandmother was so overwhelmed by her daughter's suicide, or her overdose, wasn't suicide, overdose, that she had a really hard time picking up and she lost her sobriety. She just was another whole chaotic experience. The great-grandparents were in recovery and, were able to help stabilize things. But it's just, what happens to addicted mothers is so difficult. And if you're talking about addicted mothers with several small children, the addicted mother often is having so much trouble anyway just parenting at all. She might be probably a single mother often or with multiple partners in and out. She can have compromised children, a lot of lost pregnancies, compromised pregnancies, kids with fetal alcohol syndrome, kids that are born in withdrawal and have a lot of learning disabilities and behavioral problems right off the bat, difficult to manage. So she's really overwhelmed. Just all the impact on the kids is terrible. But there's also a very limited resource in terms of treatment often for addicted mothers. Trying to get to a treatment center or an outpatient program or even to AA meetings or NA meetings. It can be really tough. You don't have available babysitters. Maybe your family's so chaotic. A lot of people just can't go for 6 months or a year to treatment or afford anything like that, and they can't find alternate caregiving for their kids. A lot of treatment centers won't even take pregnant women.
There are those rare programs. Actually, I did a lot of my work in recovery in Key West, Florida, and we actually had a 1-year program for mothers and their children, and they all moved into the same housing, and they had therapy and groups, and they went to meetings, and there was always care for the kids. Some people would bring in whether it was codependent meetings, or also just NA and AA meetings, and everybody really thrived until, of course, the funding ran out, and it just felt like
it's expensive.
Yeah, when you looked at the budgets, when it came to preventative care for mental health and addiction, that's the lower end of the budget. It's the first thing that would get cut. We're like more of a crisis intervention society versus a prevention, society, unfortunately.
We don't have any centers like that out here, do we?
We used to.
MFI recovery, they will allow mothers and children there. And they give them a lieu of services.
MFI, it's in Riverside.
What about Coachella Valley Rescue?
Yeah, but their program's a little bit different. They're not really focusing on.
They're not like we still have drug court?
Yes, we still have drug court.
Is Martha's Vineyard still?
Martha's Village is still there, but they don't do the kind of like treatment programs that some of the other places do. Like Metcalf and Metcalf opened up a female. Like at one point it was only male down in Blythe because Blythe has a severe lack of services. So now they have one for both male and female. MFI is in Riverside, but they also have like sister properties in San Jacinto, and they have a outpatient in Banning. But we're very limited out here.
Yeah.
Right out here, I'm not hearing much.
Like ABC, but like I won't send my clients to ABC because they actively do like drug transactions at ABC.
I heard that people
So,
who work there provide drugs to some
yeah,
people.
it wasn't like that with Danny. Remember? Do you remember?
Yeah.
Danny back
Oh,
in the
sure.
day?
Oh,
Remember
yeah.
Danny?
Oh, yeah.
Danny was the greatest. Then
Yeah.
somebody else took over, and it just lost all of its
No, I've
prestige,
heard that
unfortunately.
they're actually getting drugs from the people who run the program sometimes.
Well, they get fired though when they're
Yeah.
caught.
Yeah.
It's not something that they promote, but it's
But it's easy for but also if you're gonna
But-
send your clients there, the whole point is to get better.
Right.
Like some of the other clients will get in trouble on purpose and violate and go and sell because it's a good way for them to make money. Like
Yeah, you're
and they
dealing
kinda
with
look the other
addicts.
way.
Yeah.
And it was just too.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
It's unfortunate.
Is Mama's House still doing some of that? Mama's House, is that still happening?
But
Mama's
I don't
House is
know
like
that.
a whole different animal. But
I
it's
mean,
like-
even at higher end ones like Betty Ford, where
Yeah.
Jane and I worked, the people would use in treatment.
Oh, yeah.
And you'd be like, what are you doing here? You're not done. Let your elevator
stop on a lower floor.
But MFI is a really great one, and it's dual diagnosis
Yeah.
too.
Oh, that, and it's,
So-
and mothers and children
Riverside.
can go, and
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
and is it a longer term, or is it
Yeah.
a typical 30
I
days?
think it's
They-
longer.
They do, like,
Yeah.
you can go up to 90 days, like,
Oh.
you do the 30 days, and they can extend it through the Medi-Cal. And, you know, Riverside County just got that, like, huge multi-million-dollar grant for drug use. So anyway, so they go there for like 90 days, and they go, you know, like, they'll go over to the sister property in San Jacinto. I can't remember what that's called, do you remember?
Like a sober living kind of?
Sober living.
Okay, yeah.
So then they can stay there for up to a year.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
great,
it's
that's
great.
really good.
But it's limited in terms of how many folks can actually
yeah,
get
it's just
the
that
use
they
of
only
it. That's
have
a
a
problem.
handful.
Yeah.
And a lot
Yeah.
of summer livings, they don't allow kids to do
Right.
either.
Yeah.
Right.
But the longer that I think they can stay in some form of structured environment where they have to be accountable and stay clean and get drug tested, you know, the more chance they are gonna
Yeah.
ultimately stay sober.
Okay, so, SUD and SIBS. This is a problem. I mean, this is something that I had personal experience as the addicted sibling. Really expose non-using siblings, younger siblings usually, or any age siblings, I guess, but to drug culture, to expose them to drug use. Sometimes we'll encourage them to use too, because you're thinking, isn't that fun? Expose SIBs to really overwhelming circumstances, dangerous circumstances. They siphon off a lot of the family resource and energy. Sometimes, you know, just getting someone into treatment is hugely expensive. And sometimes people go to treatment several times. I mean, that you can talk $1 million, you know, really, when you're talking about how expensive this is and how much the family resources can be stripped. Distracted parents just focused on this kid, or a couple of them, and they lose all their ability to protect. You know, usually the family becomes pretty dysfunctional. So the less troubled kids get neglected. You know, there's no resources or attention or anything going to them. So I think we have to, when you're looking at addicted families, you have to look at the whole picture, and I think you were talking about that earlier. Just the whole picture, everyone's affected, even if they are resistant. You know, I can see why a lot of kids are resistant to help, and they're also blaming the addict as the problem. And the addict, you know, created a lot of stuff, but the family is left with a lot of damage themselves. And so maybe people don't see it right away, but I think as professionals, we have to really look at the whole package.
And isn't it true that once an addict may not be addicted to alcohol anymore, they may still have the same behaviors with an addiction to something else?
Often that does.
The family still helps with, or, you know, gets involved with?
Well, yeah, because I guess there's a slide down here about the various, let's see, the way that families work. Claudia Black was a writer who's written a lot about the family, you know, roles, and, you know, she calls them the heroes, the scapegoats, the lost children or family members, and the entertainers, distractors, comedians that are the family, that lift the family up in moments of crisis. So the whole system is geared toward dealing with crisis. And it isn't uncommon for people to have multiple addictions. But, you know, usually if the person gets clean and sober, they might be gambling still, or they might be involved in some other chaos. But often the situation gets better, but these roles are how the family operates, and they aren't necessarily impacted in any way. When we're talking about these enmeshed kids that are taking care of, like, handicapped parents and things like that, that's really what a lot of kids wind up doing with addicted parents. They're like dealing with handicapped parents. And so you have these parentified kids, and even though they are amazing and they can have glorious coping skills that come out of this and be very empathetic people, they also are traumatized by overwhelming responsibility of caring for this impacted, disabled parent or parents, or maybe several family members, and are overwhelmed taking care. I know people that have taken care of, they feed the family, they cook for the family, they shop for the family, they protect the family, they do, everything at 10, or 9.
And then also, I think, the part of the denial factor would be like the question of, well, I'm an alcoholic, so I don't drink alcohol anymore, but I can smoke pot, or I can do edibles. But I think, then people have to realize maybe you can. There's a whole kind of path of, it's called harm reduction. Oh, I don't shoot heroin anymore, but I can do pot. But I think, if you are truly, substance dependent, then whatever mind-altering substance you use is going to wake up the dragon, and you might be able to hang in there for a little while functioning with another substance, but then eventually you'll most likely go back to the drug of choice.
Well, and I think that's becoming a huge issue now, that people think that, there are hard drugs and that's addiction, and then there's alcohol and pot, which are really not addiction.
Yeah.
Was I have a few clients, adult clients, that they're not drinking anymore. It's been years and years and years. They've been in recovery, but they are shopaholics, or
Yeah.
they go to the casino and this and that. Do you tend to just refer them, other than the therapy, to look at the underlying issue, to which is really important, to 12-step? Does 12-step blend well with those kinds of addictions?
I think so. I mean, with certain things, people do get, that's
Well,
the problem.
There's Debtors
Yeah.
Anonymous, there's
Yeah.
Gamblers Anonymous, and so those would be two, especially if they already are, connected to a 12-step program and it feels like it's working, or they can use their 12-step program they're in and just kind of do the same, realize, well, there are recovering gamblers who just can't go in a casino, and they cannot play, football, all the different ways you can gamble that are outside of a casino,
Stock market.
Yeah. Or the shopping thing, that's something it's again, getting honest with yourself and
Looking at what
yeah,
needs.
yeah.
And like, these things do pop up because the addiction does fill something, fills a gap. And it's really hard sometimes to find substitutes that are, as fulfilling other than like a eating disorder or a, gambling problem. But, those can be dealt with as you go along. But it's more, I think, the family dynamic isn't just the addict. It's this whole system that surrounds it. And it enables various members, but all of the members are harmed. No matter if they're the jokester and it doesn't look like, it looks like it's rolling off their back, or the hero making the straight A's and in the cheerleading, or a football star, or, adding, sort of glory to the family, or they're the other drug addicted kid, or they're the, just hiding in their bedroom kid. They're all impacted, and it takes work, and it's hard for them to see it because it looks like it's them, looks like that. It's really the whole system around it that is really important to change, because if that doesn't happen, then people go on to just continue to suffer in a way, or the person that is the addicted person can then they'll wind up losing their entire family, because that family needs an addict. And the addicted person can be, doesn't fit anymore. So, there's a lot of things that, the reasons why family recovery is so important. But like getting people to go is like a whole nother thing. I hear that.
I have one family that I'm working with where the husband's in AA recovery, the wife's in Al-Anon recovery, and then their kids, when they were teenagers, went to Al-Anon. And then everything just started to really improve in their lives, because even when each individual was having their own level of crisis, they had, a sponsor to go to, or other members of, the program they were in to go through, and they didn't have to typically, go to the parent that they were upset with, or
the first family that I had as a clinician was a family of 13 people, and I was seeing them for family family therapy. And it was pretty overwhelming, you know, as a first group of clients. But the mother, she was the matriarch, was the alcoholic everybody was focused on. So this whole family came in relationship to her treatment. It turned out there were several other addicted family members. I think there were about 4 or 5 adults in the family that wound up going through treatment and getting, the husband actually finally wound up going to treatment himself and getting, a bunch of the other folks went to Al-Anon and did different things. And that,
It just occurred to me that
oh,
it hadn't been charged, it hadn't
Oh.
been plugged in, but it lasts a long time.
okay. Anyway, so there were multiple people that, you know, wound up in recovery, really the whole family, because they all were so willing to come into treatment all together and work this out, and it was amazing.
How
But
many kids were there?
there were, it was a blended family. There were like 4 or 5 kids over here and 2 kids over here, and then in-laws, and, you know, it was like,
Wow.
it was a group. But anyway, the tragic thing was I worked with them in a different place, and then when I was working at Betty Ford Center, the mother, the original client, came into treatment, and ultimately she died from her addiction. But the rest of the family, as far as I know, is still sober. Which is just a tragic kind of ending to that, but yeah.
In thinking of all of this, because I think you brought a lot of information that we just don't have. So, for Minors Counsel as therapists, we're dealing with a family, okay? Mom, we'll just do mom because, okay, so mom she was drinking, she doesn't want to lose custody, so she goes into treatment or AA, whatever. Are her parenting abilities probably somewhat compromised?
I would say yes.
Something for Minors Counsel to think about? I mean, 'cause
Yeah.
usually or at least I'm thinking, maybe not you, we think about, okay, she's in recovery, okay, so everything's fine, we're okay. And we don't always see that, but, I mean, that's kind of, I think, where the court goes with it, if like they go and get better, if they're getting better, then
But-
we're okay.
Also, wouldn't they be assigned like parenting classes?
Probably.
And, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I worked for, I was a clinical supervisor for a drug court, and we had, you know, the kids and adults who had gotten felonies from their drug use, first-time felony, but we also had the family treatment,
Mhm.
you know, where they lost their kids and they were trying to get their
Right.
kids back or figure out the balanced custody.
Yeah, that's usually in the criminal or juvenile area, yeah. But
Yeah.
In family court, yeah, family law, we would typically be sending people to parenting classes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and
that's not typical, they don't do that much anymore.
They don't?
Not
Okay.
even 1 out of
Well,
50 cases of that I see.
way back in the day.
So we should ask for that for Minors Counsel.
You should, absolutely.
Cheryl, the only problem, and I don't, hope it's not a case that anybody here is on, but, the dad is, cause he travels, and he's a legitimate reason, he's doing all of the parenting classes online. He was ordered because he drank with the kids in the car. Excuse me, and so I said, what are you getting from it? Kind of my typical question. He says, well, I log on, and my camera's on the whole time. I said, great, what are you learning from it? Well, not to drink with the kids in the car. I said, okay, but what else are you learning about?
Mhm.
So, because so much is online,
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
don't have that, I don't know.
The
I hate
efficacy is
online
not
for
there.
that.
Well, yeah, you don't have to be engaged
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
But it's not necessary, you can't, the problem is the availability of these classes, whether it's in juvenile dependency or whatever, the availability of these classes is problematic, right? And when people get there, and the people that don't have transportation, causes a problem.
They can't leave work. and
Yeah.
Or whatever it may be, so online is important, what's important is the classes actually
What's that?
be done by a provider who checks in, yes, you can have people interact, on those classes. And make sure that
pretty darn
they
good program
they
to
have
have.
homework,
It's a great
most of the
program,
pairing classes
but
require
it's
some sort of
specific
a
to
homework
the
type of thing that
criminal
goes
stuff.
with it.
Well, no,
At least
actually,
the ones
wait,
that I
family
see, I've seen,
preservation court,
for
juvenile
that
can
are
refer
approved
them to
by
family, but
for
family
dependency,
can't
let's
refer
put it
to
that.
juvenile.
Okay, so there are a lot of parenting classes out there.
Well, why don't you guys speak to everybody?
I was just asking
Oh.
because I don't know,
Oh.
I don't know family, I just know juvenile.
Really?
For family law,
Okay,
change
they can't order
requesting
probably
essentially
finances.
at least equivalent or better of what they
Probably
would.
funding.
I wondered about that, cause
Because
it's such a
that
good
is
program.
pre-required, and they have to provide.
File a motion.
Well, there's
Request for
ways
order
of
asking to
doing
do
that
it.
online. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I see people for parenting sometimes, and I'm all online now, even though I'm not a big fan of telehealth, but that is what I'm doing. So there's ways, because they have
I
to,
know you did.
it's live, they have to.
I asked it.
It's not I think the pre-recorded ones are where it
Right,
becomes
that's why it
problematic.
needs to be like an approved course. It would be
Yeah.
helpful, either family law would have like say they
A list.
approve these classes or whatever they may be that are at least a starting point to be approved. Not that you couldn't necessarily get something else approved, but at least those things would be approved. That would be helpful.
When you do the co-parent, that's a good point, when you do the co-parenting, it's just the parents and you are engaged in,
Yeah, it's a
with them.
therapy
And you
session.
can, it's therapy, and so you can watch what's going on, and, you know, it's not our favorite thing, but it
Yeah.
works. But when you have a class full of maybe 12 people, I'm not putting them down, and maybe it's the only way they're able to do it.
Yeah.
But can they attend to every single person? And I just heard that the federal government is cutting the funding for telehealth.
Wow.
Well, they're cutting everything else.
I specifically saw telehealth.
Well, I don't know where they're cutting, cause like,
No,
I pay for all of mine.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
no, I
Well,
specifically saw
You know,
telehealth on there.
Angela just brought up something a minute ago. She said, why can't the family court refer them to family preservation court? You know, and there used to be a provision to do that. I would say if minors counsel comes up with something you want the judge to do an RFO, asking the judge to do it. You might come across somebody like me who says, why not? I'll do it, and if somebody
What is family
objects.
preservation court? I don't even know.
You wanna explain it, Angela?
So like for family preservation court, it's the families coming in, and essentially the judge kind of helps them. It's like a wraparound for, usually wraparound.
Is it part of criminal?
Well, that's what kind of what I wanna know. In juvenile, we can do it, and I think in criminal, we do it too as well. But the family preservation court, the judge oversees it. They go in originally like every Friday before the court. Hey, what classes have you done? You've been drug testing, you've been, it's a comprehensive approach of helping the families instead of just like in our, it's terrible in juvenile, cause we have those like, oh, I ask for therapy for every single one of my kids. And I'll wait 2 to 3 months and then I'll get a Zoom therapist. And it's like, this stinks.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what can we do different? Always trying to think of things like outside of the box. From when I heard about family preservation court, like a long time ago, I think when I was practicing criminal, I was like, what a great program. Why don't we do that more often? So we can start doing that through juvenile. But I was just asking, because I don't have a lot of family law experience. Why doesn't family law do it? Because it is a great
You would
program.
think.
The only
Great program.
experience I had with family preservation court was when I would sit in for, at that time Commissioner Olson, now Judge Olson, when he was doing the family preservation court. And what would happen is the juvenile court would refer them to family preservation court, which was conducted in the family law department. The converse was that family was supposed to be able to refer them to juvenile court for a family preservation court. That never really happened. And it may have been simply because of funding, it may have been because of overwhelming calendars, I don't know.
Yeah, I think so.
When Commissioner McCoy was here, and I was becoming a new pro tem, I'm the only attorney I know of as a pro tem that trained for that. So I trained right along with Commissioner McCoy, and I go in there every Friday, but it was drug court and family preservation on the same day, wasn't it? No?
I don't know. I always experienced
It was
drug
all
court in a
together,
different one. What I did back in my day when I was doing drug court, it was different. But family law, the family preservation court, the families did so much. The rate of success was so significant compared to the ones that did not get in there.
Yeah.
Like our families almost like our judges took a breath, kind of like we know she's gonna make it, you know, because she has this big support the way that they don't have otherwise.
Yeah.
Like when he was talking about drug court. In Riverside and San Bernardino, they used to have drug court for juvenile courts. Like, so that, because you're kind of addressing the problem of it's the entire family, it's not just the kid. Like, everybody has to be involved in that. But we don't have that in Riverside County anymore. Like, they had it, but they never really got it off the ground in Riverside. But in San Bernardino, they have that. And it helps the entire family. But the family preservation court is amazing, and I just wondered why they don't do that
Yeah.
more.
I wasn't given a direct reason as to why, But I was told by Judge Reed that they were not able to refer them to family preservation through family court. I had to find alternatives, but I don't know the reason behind it.
I think because it's a juvenile program.
It was supposed to be reciprocal, but I don't know that it ever was.
Probably budget, there's probably nobody to cover it.
That's
Yeah.
probably the problem.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're getting close.
Okay.
Although Judge Reed said the other day, her job is now open for a new commissioner here.
Correct. They should be hiring a new commissioner now.
So maybe they could,
Well, the fact that they hire the commissioner is only gonna put that commissioner in another family law assignment probably. I don't know. The nice thing about being retired is I don't have to keep up with that.
I know, but maybe you could say, we're
I guess
working
we could try an idea.
family law
Should we?
attorney